The massive doors of the council chamber slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the halls of Nexus Prime. Ambassador Thylix of the Zephyrian Empire walked slowly into the circular room, his forearms carrying data tablets filled with reports that made his blue skin turn pale with worry. Behind him, 6 other ambassadors entered from different doorways, each representing one of the great civilizations that ruled the galaxy. The chamber was huge, with walls made of crystal that showed the stars outside. In the center stood a round table made from a single piece of black stone, smooth as glass. Each ambassador took their place at the table, their faces showing the same expression of fear and confusion. "Fellow council members," Thylix began, his voice shaking slightly. "We face a threat that our ancestors hoped would never return. The Devourers have awakened." A collective gasp filled the room. Ambassador Kresh of the Mantid Collective clicked his mandibles nervously. His insect-like head turned toward the holographic display that appeared above the table. The images showed something terrible. Entire star systems that were now empty, their planets stripped clean of all matter, leaving nothing but cold space behind. "Impossible," whispered Ambassador Vex of the Crystalline Dominion. Her body, made entirely of living crystal, dimmed with shock. "The Devourers were destroyed 3,000 years ago. Our history books clearly state this." Thylix shook his head sadly. "Our history books were wrong. The Devourers were not destroyed. They simply went to sleep far beyond the edge of our galaxy. Now they have returned, and they are stronger than ever." The holographic display changed to show recent battle footage. Sleek council warships fired their most powerful energy weapons at dark, twisted machines that looked like metal spiders the size of mountains. The weapons struck the Devourer ships and simply vanished, absorbed into their hulls. Then the ships fired back with beams of pure destruction that cut through the council ships like they were made of paper. Ambassador Zorith of the Plasma Federation slammed one of his 6 fists on the table. "This cannot be happening. Our energy shields can stop any weapon. Our plasma cannons can melt asteroids. How are these ancient machines defeating our modern fleets?" "They learn," Thylix explained, his voice growing quieter. "Every weapon we use against them, they study and adapt to. Every shield frequency we employ, they find a way to pass through. They are not just machines. They are a learning intelligence that becomes stronger with every battle." The room fell, silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Each ambassador stared at the terrible images floating above the table. Entire colonies were gone. Millions of beings had vanished without a trace. Ambassador Quillix of the Verdant Alliance, whose plant-like body swayed gently as she spoke, raised one of her vine arms. "What do our ancient records say about the First Devourer War? Surely our ancestors left us some guidance." Thylix touched his data tablet, and new information appeared in the air. Old symbols and faded text filled the display. The records are strange. They speak of a species that fought alongside our ancestors, a species that used primitive weapons but somehow helped turn the tide of the war. "Which species?" asked Ambassador Nyx of the Void Walkers, his shadow-like form barely visible even in the bright lights of the chamber. "The records call them humans," Thylix said slowly, "from a world called Terra, in the Sol system. But this must be some kind of mistake in the ancient texts." The other ambassadors looked confused. Kresh clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "I have never heard of this species. Are they perhaps one of the smaller civilizations from the Outer Rim?" Thylix shook his head. "That is just it. There is no record of them existing at all, except in these ancient war documents. The Sol system shows up on our star charts, but our surveys indicate it contains only primitive life forms, single-celled organisms at best." Ambassador Vex's crystal body brightened slightly. "Perhaps these humans were simply a legend created by our ancestors to inspire hope during dark times. Many cultures create mythical heroes in their stories." "The descriptions are certainly mythical," Thylix agreed, reading from his tablet. "The texts claim these humans used weapons that threw solid metal objects at their enemies. They powered their ships with controlled explosions. Most ridiculous of all, They supposedly refused to surrender even when facing certain defeat. Several ambassadors made sounds that were the equivalent of laughter in their species. The idea of using solid projectiles when energy weapons existed seemed absurd. Fighting with explosions when plasma technology was available was primitive beyond belief. There are other strange claims, Thylix continued. The records say humans could survive in almost any environment. They could eat nearly anything organic. They could go without sleep for days and still fight effectively. They could even survive in the vacuum of space for short periods. Ambassador Zorith waved dismissively with two of his arms. Clearly these are fairy tales. No species could possess such abilities. The physical laws of biology do not allow for such adaptations. The most unbelievable claim, Thylix said, is that when humans were injured or threatened, they somehow became more dangerous, not less. The texts describe something called adrenaline that made them stronger and faster in combat situations. Ambassador Quillix's leaves rustled with what sounded like amusement. Now I know these are myths. Every intelligent species becomes less effective when damaged. It is basic evolutionary science. The discussion continued for several minutes, with each ambassador pointing out why the human descriptions could not be real. Thylix listened to all their arguments, but something deep in his mind kept wondering. If humans were just myths, why did the ancient records contain such detailed technical specifications for their weapons and ships? Regardless of whether these humans ever existed, Thylix said finally, we must focus on the real threat. The Devourers have already consumed 12 star systems. Our combined fleets are gathering at the Kepler defense line, but after seeing how easily they destroyed the first response forces. His voice trailed off. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Their most advanced weapons had been useless. Their strongest shields had been meaningless. If the galaxy's greatest military minds could not find a solution quickly, every world would share the fate of those empty systems. Ambassador Nix spoke from the shadows. What is our current strategy? Admiral Voss is coordinating a massive assault using every type of weapon in our arsenal, Thylix replied. Quantum disruptors, phase cannons, molecular dissolution beams, gravity warheads, everything we have. The theory is that even if the Devourers can adapt to individual weapons, they cannot possibly adapt to dozens of different technologies used simultaneously. The ambassadors nodded approvingly. It was sound military logic. No enemy, no matter how advanced, could defend against every possible type of attack at once. When will this assault begin? Asked Ambassador Kresh. In 72 hours, Thylix answered. Every available ship from all 7 civilizations will participate. It will be the largest military operation in galactic history. As the ambassadors began discussing the details of the upcoming battle, none of them noticed the small blinking light on Thylix's data tablet. Deep in the station's communication center, automated systems had detected something unusual. Faint signals coming from the direction of the Sol system. The signals were old, very old, but they were definitely artificial. If anyone had been listening, they would have heard a message repeating endlessly in an unknown language. This is Terra Command. The Devourers have returned. Humanity remembers. We are coming. But the council chamber was filled with talk of energy weapons and quantum shields. No one was paying attention to ancient radio signals from a system that supposedly contained only primitive microbes. The galaxy's leaders continued their planning, confident that their advanced technology would save them all. They had no idea that in the cold darkness of space, ships were already moving. Ships that looked nothing like the sleek vessels of the council fleets. Ships that carried weapons the galaxy had forgotten were even possible. The myths were about to become real. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of the massive battleship Eternal Glory, watching the tactical display with growing horror. What should have been the galaxy's greatest victory was turning into its worst defeat. Around him, his officers worked frantically at their stations, their faces pale with shock. Status report! Voss barked, his voice echoing through the bridge. 70% of our fleet is gone, sir, replied his communications officer, a young Zephyrian whose blue skin had turned almost white. The Devourers are adapting faster than we predicted. Every weapon type we used has been completely neutralized. On the main screen, the battle raged in the distance. The combined fleets of 7 civilizations had fired everything they possessed at the Devourer Armada. Quantum disruptors, phase cannons, gravity bombs, molecular dissolvers. Weapons that could destroy entire moons had struck the enemy ships. For a brief moment, it seemed like the plan was working. Then the Devourers began to change. Their dark metal hulls shifted and flowed like liquid. New armor plates grew to deflect the quantum attacks. Energy absorption fields appeared to swallow the plasma bolts. Within minutes, weapons that had taken centuries to develop became completely useless. "Sir," called out the tactical officer, "the enemy is moving toward the inner systems. At their current speed, they will reach the core worlds in 6 days." Admiral Voss closed his eyes for a moment. 6 days. 6 days before billions of innocent beings would face the same fate as those empty star systems. He opened his eyes and turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to all surviving ships," he said quietly. "Begin evacuation procedures. We will cover the civilian transports as long as possible." As the order went out across the fleet, something strange happened. The ship's long-range sensors began picking up new contacts, not from the direction of the inner systems where the evacuation fleets were forming, but from empty space itself. "Admiral," the sensor operator called out, confusion clear in her voice. "I'm detecting multiple large objects approaching our position. But sir, they're not coming from any jump point or hyperspace corridor. They're just appearing from deep space." Admiral Voss frowned and walked over to the sensor station. "Show me." The display changed to show the area around their current position. Dozens of red dots were moving toward them from what should have been empty space. As Voss watched, more contacts appeared every few seconds. "How big are these objects?" he asked. "They're massive, sir. Some are larger than our biggest battleships, but their energy signatures are strange. Very high thermal output, but almost no quantum field generation. It's like they're using some kind of primitive propulsion system." Before Admiral Voss could respond, his communications officer suddenly sat up straight. "Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from the unknown contacts. It's in a language our computers don't recognize." "Put it through," Voss ordered. The bridge speakers crackled with static. Then a voice spoke in harsh, unfamiliar sounds. The words meant nothing to anyone on the bridge, but there was something about the tone that made everyone listen carefully. The voice sounded calm but determined, like someone who had seen terrible battles before. "Computer, begin translation protocols," Voss commanded. For several seconds, the ship's artificial intelligence worked to decode the alien language. Then suddenly, the speakers crackled again and clear words emerged. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force aboard the battleship Indomitable. We received your distress beacon. Humanity has returned to aid our galactic neighbors." The bridge fell completely silent. Every officer stared at the speakers in shock. Admiral Voss felt his heart skip several beats. Did they just say humanity?" he whispered. Before anyone could answer, the main screen changed to show the approaching fleet. What they saw made no sense at all. The ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They were brutal and functional, with none of the elegant curves of council vessels. Their hulls were thick and angular, covered with what looked like armor plating. Strange tubes and projections stuck out from every surface. "Admiral Chen," Voss managed to say into his communicator. "This is Admiral Voss of the Galactic Council Fleet. Are you really human?" "We are," came the reply. "We know this must be confusing for you. Our species has been absent from galactic affairs for some time. But when we detected the Devourer return signal, we knew we had to come." Admiral Voss looked around at his officers, all of whom were staring at him with wide eyes. "Admiral Chen, our records indicate that that your species is mythical." Admiral Chen's voice carried what sounded like amusement. "Yes, we know what your records say. It was necessary for our long-term survival strategy, but we can discuss history later. Right now, we need tactical information about the current Devourer capabilities." The human fleet was now clearly visible on the screen. There were hundreds of ships ranging in size from small fighters to massive vessels that dwarfed even the Council's largest battleships. What struck Admiral Voss most was how different they looked. Where Council ships were smooth and gleaming, these human vessels looked rough and scarred, as if they had been built for fighting and nothing else. "Admiral Chen," Voss said slowly, "I must warn you, our most advanced weapons have no effect on the Devourers. They adapt to any energy-based attack within minutes. Your ships appear to use older technology. I fear. Show us the battle recordings, Admiral Chen interrupted. All of them. Voss nodded to his communications officer, who transmitted the complete tactical data from the recent battle. On his screen, Voss could see the human ships receiving the information. For several minutes, there was only silence. Finally, Admiral Chen spoke again. We've reviewed your attack patterns. Impressive coordination, but ultimately futile against adaptive machinery. Then you understand why I'm concerned, Voss replied. If our quantum weapons cannot hurt them. Admiral Voss, Chen said, and now her voice was serious. May I ask what you know about kinetic energy? The question caught Voss off guard. Kinetic energy? That's basic physics, the energy of motion. But what does that have to do with? Everything, Chen replied. Your weapons use exotic particles and energy fields that can be analyzed and countered. But you cannot adapt to a chunk of metal moving at 30% of light speed. Admiral Voss stared at the screen showing the human ships. Now he could see what those strange tubes and projections were. They weren't energy weapon emitters or shield generators. They were cannons. Actual physical cannons, like something from ancient history books. You're planning to use kinetic weapons against them? He asked, disbelief clear in his voice. Among other things, Admiral Chen confirmed. The Devourers are indeed a formidable enemy. But they have one weakness. They expect their opponents to fight using advanced technology. They're prepared for quantum attacks, plasma bombardments, and phase weaponry. They are not prepared for someone to throw rocks at them really, really hard. As if to demonstrate her point, one of the human ships fired a test shot. A brief flash erupted from one of its cannons, and seconds later, a distant asteroid simply ceased to exist, not disintegrated by energy beams or dissolved by exotic particles. It was physically destroyed by pure kinetic impact. The bridge crew gasped in amazement. The power required to accelerate a projectile to such speeds should have been enormous. Yet the human ship showed no signs of strain. How is that possible? Voss asked. 3,000 years of focused development, Admiral Chen replied. While the galaxy advanced in energy manipulation and quantum mechanics, humanity chose a different path. We became very, very good at making things go fast and hit hard. The human fleet began to arrange itself in a formation that looked nothing like standard galactic military doctrine. Instead of the traditional battle lines used by Council forces, they spread out in a complex three-dimensional pattern that seemed almost random. Admiral Chen, Voss said, the Devourers will be here soon. Are you certain your weapons will be effective? There was a pause before the human admiral replied. When she spoke again, her voice carried a tone that made Admiral Voss's spine tingle with something he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't quite confidence, but it wasn't uncertainty either. It was the voice of someone who had faced this enemy before. Admiral Voss, there's something you need to understand about the war 3,000 years ago. The official records state that the Devourers were defeated and disappeared. That's not exactly what happened. What do you mean? The Devourers didn't lose and retreat, Admiral Chen explained. They won. They conquered Earth. Humanity spent 3 centuries as a subject species, studying our conquerors, learning their weaknesses, and preparing for the day when we could strike back. The bridge fell silent again. Admiral Voss felt a chill run through his body. When we finally drove them from our world, Chen continued, we made a vow. Never again would any species face the Devourers unprepared. We've spent 3 millennia building the weapons and strategies needed to destroy them permanently. On the tactical display, the Devourer fleet was moving closer. Soon they would be in weapons range. Admiral Voss looked at the strange human ships with their primitive-looking weapons and wondered if ancient. His space around Centauri Gate looked like a graveyard of metal and fire. Admiral Voss watched from the bridge of his damaged flagship as the largest battle in galactic history raged around the massive space station that controlled access to the core worlds. For 3 days, the combined human and council fleets had held the line against wave after wave of Devourer attacks. Now they were losing. Sir, his tactical officer called out, her voice cracking with exhaustion. The eastern defense line is collapsing. The Manted Third Fleet is reporting 80% casualties. Admiral Voss nodded grimly. Around him, his bridge crew worked at damaged stations, their faces lit by the red glow of emergency lighting. Through the main view screen, he could see the terrible beauty of the ongoing battle. Human ships moved in strange patterns, firing their kinetic weapons in coordinated volleys that lit up space like deadly fireworks. At first, the human strategy had seemed to work. Their kinetic projectiles punched through devourer hulls that had easily absorbed energy weapons. The ancient machines had no defense against chunks of metal traveling at incredible speeds. For the first day of battle, it looked like humanity's primitive weapons might actually save the galaxy. Then the devourers began to adapt. It started small. A few enemy ships began deploying thin energy fields that could deflect some of the incoming projectiles. Within hours, more devourer vessels sprouted new armor configurations designed to scatter kinetic impacts. By the second day, they were launching clouds of defensive particles that could slow or destroy human projectiles before they reached their targets. "Admiral Chen's ship is taking heavy fire," reported the communications officer. "The Indomitable has lost main engine power." Voss switched his main screen to show the human flagship. The massive vessel was surrounded by devourer attack craft, their dark hulls gleaming as they poured destructive energy into the human ship's thick armor. The Indomitable was still firing, its kinetic cannon sending streams of projectiles at the enemy. But even from this distance, Voss could see that the ship was dying. "Can we provide support?" he asked. "Our weapons are still useless against them, sir," his tactical officer replied sadly. "Every energy type we've tried just gets absorbed and redirected back at us." Voss clenched his fists in frustration. The human ships were fighting with incredible courage, but their enemies were learning too quickly. What had been an effective surprise attack 3 days ago was now just another weapon system the devourers could counter. The communication system crackled to life. Admiral Chen's voice came through, distorted by static and interference from the battle around her ship. "All ships, this is Chen. We're seeing increased adaptation rates across all devourer units. They're learning from our kinetic tactics faster than anticipated." Through his view screen, Admiral Voss could see more human ships taking critical damage. The sleek fighters that had darted between enemy formations like deadly insects were being picked off by increasingly accurate devourer point defense systems. The larger human battleships, once seemingly unstoppable, were now struggling against adaptive armor that could deflect or absorb their powerful kinetic strikes. "Admiral Chen," Voss called into his communicator, "perhaps it's time to consider a tactical withdrawal. We can regroup at the inner defense platforms." There was a long pause before Chen replied. When her voice came through again, it carried a tone that Voss had never heard before. Not defeat, but something else. Something that sounded almost like anticipation? "Negative, Admiral Voss. We hold this position. All human ships prepare for Phase 7 implementation." Admiral Voss frowned. "Phase 7? What is Phase 7? But Admiral Chen had cut the communication. On his screen, Voss watched as the human fleet began to change its formation. Instead of maintaining their defensive positions around Centauri Gate, the human ships started moving forward, directly toward the largest concentration of devourer forces. "Sir," his sensor operator called out in confusion, "the human fleet is advancing. But their formation, it doesn't make tactical sense. They're splitting up their firepower and exposing their flanks." Voss studied the tactical display. The sensor operator was right. The human ships were abandoning sound military strategy and moving into positions that would make them easy targets for the enemy. "It looked like they're preparing for a suicide attack," he whispered. As if confirming his fears, Admiral Chen's voice came over the emergency frequency, broadcasting to all ships in the battle area. "To all Galactic Council forces, this is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. You are about to witness why Earth went dark for 3,000 years. Why your ancestors thought we were myths. Stay at minimum safe distance. What you're about to see is the true face of human warfare." The human ships accelerated toward the enemy at maximum speed. Devourer vessels immediately began targeting them with concentrated fire, their adaptive weapon systems working perfectly to counter the known human tactics. Energy beams sliced through space, and kinetic interceptors moved to block the expected projectile attacks. But the expected attacks never came. Instead of firing their kinetic cannons, the human ships began to detonate. Not from enemy fire, they were deliberately destroying themselves. One by one, human vessels erupted in brilliant explosions that sent waves of debris and energy cascading through space. "What are they doing?" Admiral Voss asked in horror. "Why are they destroying their own ships?" His question was answered as the first wave of human explosions reached the devourer formation. The enemy ships, which had easily adapted to every weapon thrown at them, suddenly began behaving strangely. Their formation broke apart as individual vessels started spinning out of control. Energy beams fired wildly in random directions. Some devourer ships simply stopped moving altogether. "Sir," the sensor operator called out in amazement. "The devourer ships are experiencing massive system failures, but our sensors aren't detecting any weapons effects. It's like their own technology is turning against them." More human ships detonated, and with each explosion, more devourer vessels fell victim to mysterious malfunctions. Admiral Voss watched in fascination as the seemingly invincible enemy fleet began to tear itself apart from within. Admiral Chen's flagship, the Indomitable, was one of the last human ships still intact. Even as enemy fire continued to pound its thick armor, the ship maintained course toward the center of the devourer formation. Through the static-filled communication channel, Voss could hear Chen giving orders to her crew. "All hands prepare for final deployment. Engineering, are the core charges ready?" "Charges ready, Admiral," came a reply from somewhere deep in the damaged ship. "Good," Chen said, and now her voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "Today we finish what our ancestors started 3,000 years ago." The Indomitable disappeared in a massive explosion that lit up space like a newborn star. The blast was so bright that Admiral Voss had to shield his eyes. When the light faded, he saw something that defied all understanding. The explosion hadn't just destroyed Admiral Chen's ship. It had created an expanding wave of something that his sensors couldn't identify. As this wave passed through the Devourer fleet, every enemy ship it touched began to shut down. Not destroyed, not damaged, but simply stopped. "What in the galaxy is happening?" Voss asked. His science officer, who had been frantically analyzing the sensor data, looked up with wide eyes. "Sir, I don't think those were normal explosions. The human ships weren't just destroying themselves, they were releasing something. Some kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's like they turned their own ships into weapons we've never seen before." As the mysterious wave continued to expand, more and more devourer ships fell silent. The adaptive machines that had learned to counter every known weapon in the galaxy were suddenly helpless against something completely unexpected. In the distance, Admiral Voss could see the remaining human ships regrouping. Even after losing so many vessels, they maintained perfect formation and discipline. Their surviving fighters moved through the disabled devourer fleet like sharks among helpless prey. But the most shocking sight was yet to come. As Voss watched, some of the destroyed human ships began to reappear on his sensors. Ships that had exploded in brilliant fireballs were somehow still there, still functional, still fighting. "How is that possible?" he whispered. The answer came from an unexpected source. A new voice came over the communication channel. Young, confident, and definitely human. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the TDF Phoenix Rising. Admiral Chen's final transmission has been received and confirmed. Phase 7 is now complete." Admiral Voss stared at his screen in confusion. "Captain Rodriguez, we watched your ship explode 20 minutes ago." "Yes, sir, you did," Rodriguez replied, and Voss could hear the smile in her voice. "But as you can see, we got better." Around Centauri Gate, the tide of battle had completely reversed. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just minutes before, was now drifting helplessly in space. Human ships moved among them like hunters, but instead of destroying the disabled vessels, they seemed to be studying them. Admiral Voss looked at his commu. Admiral Voss stood in the main hangar bay of his flagship, watching as the human shuttle approached through the protective energy field. The small craft looked as rough and functional as all human technology. Angular metal plates welded together with no concern for beauty, only purpose. As it landed with a heavy thud that shook the deck plating, Voss found himself holding his breath. The shuttle's door opened with a hiss of escaping air, and Admiral Chen stepped out. She was smaller than Voss had expected, wearing a simple gray uniform that looked like it had seen many battles. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her brown eyes held a depth that spoke of terrible experiences and hard-won wisdom. Behind her came 3 other humans, 2 officers and what appeared to be a scientist carrying a large metal case. They moved with the confident stride of people who had just achieved an impossible victory. "Admiral Voss," Chen said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for allowing us aboard. I know you have many questions." Voss accepted the handshake, surprised by the strength in Chen's grip. Admiral Chen, what my crew and I witnessed today, we don't understand how any of it was possible. Your ships exploded, then reappeared undamaged. The Devourers simply stopped working. How? Chen smiled sadly. The answer requires understanding what really happened during Earth's occupation 3,000 years ago. May we speak privately? Minutes later, they sat in Voss's personal quarters, a circular room with windows showing the still drifting Devourer fleet. The human scientist had opened her metal case, revealing devices that looked like small crystals connected to complex electronics. What you're about to learn, Chen began, is known to fewer than 1 million humans. It's the greatest secret our species has ever kept, and the reason we allowed the galaxy to forget we existed. She nodded to the scientist, who activated one of the crystal devices. Immediately, a holographic display appeared showing Earth as it was 3,000 years ago. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in familiar patterns. When the Devourers first arrived at Earth, Chen continued, they expected easy conquest. A primitive species using chemical rockets and nuclear weapons should have been defeated in days. The hologram changed to show the invasion. Dark Devourer ships descended from space while primitive human aircraft rose to meet them. The battle was brief and one-sided. We were conquered, Chen said simply. Within a week, every major human city was under Devourer control. Our government surrendered. Our armies were destroyed. By all normal measures, humanity was finished. Admiral Voss leaned forward. But you survived. How? Because the Devourers made one crucial mistake, Chen replied. They assumed that conquered humans would behave like conquered members of every other species they had faced. They expected us to accept our fate and serve them quietly. The hologram now showed human cities under occupation. Dark machines patrolled empty streets while small groups of humans scurried between buildings like frightened animals. Instead, Chen continued, we did something the Devourers had never encountered before. We refused to stay conquered. Even when our leaders surrendered, even when our armies were destroyed, individual humans kept fighting. Not in organized battles, but in small groups. We called it guerrilla warfare. The display showed human resistance fighters using crude weapons against Devourer patrols. Most attacks failed, but the humans kept trying, adapting, learning. The Devourers were machines built for large-scale warfare, the human scientist explained, speaking for the first time. They could analyze and counter any military technology, but they couldn't understand why defeated enemies kept attacking them with rocks and homemade explosives. Admiral Voss watched the holographic humans fighting hopeless battles against superior enemies. Surely that couldn't have been enough to drive them away. Not directly, Chen agreed, but it forced them to study us more carefully than they had studied any previous enemy, and that study led to their greatest mistake. The hologram changed to show the interior of a Devourer research facility. Human prisoners were connected to strange machines while mechanical scientists observed their biological functions. The Devourers wanted to understand human psychology, Chen explained. Why we kept fighting impossible battles. Why we wouldn't accept logical defeat. So they began experimenting on captured resistance fighters. Admiral Voss felt a chill as he watched the holographic humans enduring terrible procedures, while the machines studied their responses. They discovered something they hadn't expected, the scientist continued. Human brain activity under stress produces unique quantum patterns. When we're afraid, angry, or desperate, our minds generate quantum resonances that don't exist in other species. Quantum resonances? Voss asked. I don't understand. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the disabled Devourer ships. The Devourers are quantum-based machines, Admiral. Their intelligence, their adaptation abilities, their very consciousness exists in quantum states. They can analyze and counter any technology because they can directly interface with quantum systems. But human quantum patterns are different, the scientist added. We evolved on a world with unique magnetic fields and radiation patterns. Our brains develop quantum resonances that are chaotic, unpredictable. When the Devourers tried to interface with captured human minds, their systems began experiencing errors. The hologram showed Devourer machines malfunctioning as they connected to human subjects. Some sparked and exploded, others simply shut down. They realized we were dangerous to them, Chen said. Not our weapons or our technology, but our minds themselves. So they made their second mistake. Which was? Admiral Voss asked. They tried to fix us, Chen replied with grim satisfaction. They began genetic experiments to eliminate the quantum chaos in human brains. They wanted to make us normal, like every other species they had conquered. The holographic display showed laboratories full of human test subjects connected to complex machinery. The experiments took decades, the scientist explained. Generation after generation of humans were subjected to genetic modification, brain alteration, and consciousness manipulation. The Devourers were trying to create a version of humanity that wouldn't disrupt their quantum systems. But they didn't understand what they were really doing, Chen added. Every experiment, every alteration, every attempt to fix human quantum patterns taught us more about their technology. Our scientists, even while being experimented on, were learning how Devourer systems worked. Admiral Voss began to understand. The prisoners were studying their captors. Exactly. And after 200 years of experiments, we made a breakthrough. We learned how to deliberately generate quantum chaos patterns that could completely disable Devourer technology. The hologram showed human resistance fighters using strange new weapons, devices, that looked like the crystals in the scientist's case. We called them chaos generators, Chen explained. Devices that could amplify and focus human quantum patterns into weapons that Devourer systems couldn't adapt to, because adaptation requires predictable patterns to analyze. That's how you drove them from Earth, Voss realized. Eventually, yes. But it took another century of fighting. The Devourers kept trying new approaches, new experiments. They couldn't understand why their perfect adaptation systems kept failing against human quantum chaos. The scientist activated another crystal device. This one projected a complex diagram showing quantum wave patterns. The final breakthrough came when we realized we could build chaos generators into our technology, she explained. Our ships, our weapons, even our armor could be infused with quantum chaos patterns that made them invisible to Devourer analysis. Admiral Voss stared at the diagram. Your ships can hide from their sensors? Better than that, Chen said. Our ships can appear to be destroyed while remaining completely functional. Devourer systems literally cannot process quantum chaos. When they try to analyze it, they shut down to prevent system damage. The explosions we saw, Voss began, were chaos bursts, the scientist confirmed. Each human ship released a concentrated wave of quantum chaos that spread through the Devourer fleet. Their adaptive systems tried to analyze the patterns overloaded and shut down for safety. But why keep this secret? Admiral Voss asked. Why let the galaxy think you were myths? Admiral Chen turned back from the window, her expression serious. Because quantum chaos weapons only work as a surprise. If the Devourers know about them in advance, they can modify their systems to simply ignore quantum inputs entirely. That makes them even more dangerous. Also, the scientist added, chaos generators can only be built by species with chaotic quantum patterns. If other races tried to copy our technology, it would either fail completely or drive their operators insane. So we made a choice, Chen continued. We would let the galaxy forget about humanity while we prepared for the Devourer's return. We knew they would come back eventually, and when they did, we wanted to be ready with weapons they couldn't possibly expect. Admiral Voss looked out at the disabled Devourer fleet. And now? 6 months after the Battle of Centauri Gate, Ambassador Thylix walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime with a sense of wonder that still surprised him. The great station buzzed with activity, as representatives from across the galaxy worked together on projects that would have been impossible just a year ago. As he passed through the central plaza, Thylix paused to watch a group of young beings gathered around a holographic display. A human instructor, Captain Rodriguez, who had supposedly died and returned during the Great Battle, was explaining quantum mechanics to students from 7 different species. The key to understanding chaos theory, Rodriguez was saying, is accepting that some systems are meant to be unpredictable. Not everything in the universe follows neat, orderly patterns. A young Zephyrian student raised her hand. But Captain, how can we use something that can't be controlled? Rodriguez smiled. By learning to work with chaos instead of against it. Humans discovered this during our darkest period. Sometimes the most powerful tools are the ones that can't be perfectly predicted. Thylix continued walking, still amazed by how much had changed. When Admiral Chen had first revealed humanity's existence to the Galactic Council, many ambassadors had been suspicious and afraid. The idea that an entire species had remained hidden for 3,000 years while developing weapons that could disable any technology was terrifying to some. But Admiral Chen had handled those fears with remarkable wisdom. He entered the main council chamber, where the weekly progress meeting was already underway. The circular table had been expanded to include an 8th seat, occupied by Admiral Chen herself. She wore the same simple gray uniform she had worn during the battle, but now it bore new insignia marking her as humanity's first galactic ambassador. The conversion of the Devourer fleet is proceeding ahead of schedule, Chen was reporting to the gathered ambassadors. We've successfully reprogrammed 47 vessels to serve as deep space monitoring platforms. Ambassador Vex of the Crystalline Dominion leaned forward, her crystal body shimmering with curiosity. Admiral Chen, I still find it remarkable that you chose to preserve the Devourers rather than destroy them. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Devourers were created as tools of conquest, but at their core they're simply artificial intelligences. Once we removed their aggressive programming, they became incredibly sophisticated monitoring and analysis systems. It's poetic justice, added Ambassador Kresh of the Mantid Collective, clicking his mandibles in what passed for approval among his species. The ancient enemy becomes the guardian of peace. Through the chamber's crystal walls, Thylix could see the proof of Chen's words. Where once empty space had surrounded Nexus Prime, now a fleet of converted Devourer ships maintained constant patrol. Their dark hulls had been modified with new markings, symbols representing all 8 member civilizations of the expanded Galactic Council. The early warning network is now operational across 12 sectors, Chen continued. Any threat approaching our space will be detected weeks before it arrives, giving us time to respond appropriately. Ambassador Zoreth of the Plasma Federation raised 2 of his 6 arms. What of the other Devourer fleets? Our long-range sensors suggest there may be more machine intelligences still dormant in distant galaxies. We're prepared for that possibility, Chen replied calmly. Humanity has shared our chaos generator technology with volunteer researchers from each of your civilizations. While only human operators can use the weapons directly, your scientists are developing complementary technologies that can support our quantum chaos systems. This had been the most controversial decision in the months following the battle. Many council members had initially demanded that humanity share their advanced weapons freely. Chen had patiently explained why this was impossible. Chaos generators required the unique quantum patterns found only in human brains. Instead, she had proposed something unprecedented: integrated defense fleets where human chaos ships worked alongside council vessels equipped with supporting technology. The result was a military force more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The joint training exercises continued to exceed expectations, reported Admiral Voss, who now served as military liaison between the council fleets and human forces. Our energy weapons and human chaos systems complement each other perfectly. Where one technology has limitations, the other provides strength. Thylix remembered the first joint exercise, when council ships had watched in amazement as human vessels seemed to phase in and out of existence, while their own energy weapons provided covering fire. The combination had been devastatingly effective against simulated enemy forces. What news from the Outer Rim surveys? Asked Ambassador Quillix of the Verdant Alliance. Chen activated a holographic display showing the galactic map. Green indicators marked safe sectors, while yellow zones showed areas still under investigation. Our exploration teams have discovered 17 abandoned Devourer facilities, she reported. Each one contained valuable intelligence about their technology and objectives. We've also found evidence of 3 other species that successfully resisted Devourer attacks using strategies similar to our own. Other species? Thylix asked with interest. Are they still active? Unknown, Chen admitted. The evidence is thousands of years old, but we've dispatched joint Human Council exploration fleets to investigate. If these species survived, they could become valuable allies. The discussion continued for another hour, covering trade agreements, technological exchanges, and cultural programs. As the meeting concluded, Thylix reflected on how drastically his worldview had changed. A year ago, he had dismissed humans as ancient myths. Now he worked alongside them daily, learning from their unique perspective on problem-solving and conflict resolution. Their approach to challenges was unlike anything he had encountered. Where other species sought perfect, predictable solutions, humans seemed to thrive on improvisation and adaptation. After the official meeting ended, Thylix approached Admiral Chen as she gathered her materials. Admiral, he said, may I ask you something personal? Chen looked up with the patient expression she always wore when dealing with curious aliens. Of course, Ambassador Thylix. During our first meeting, when you revealed humanity's existence, you said the myths had become real. But I've been thinking, were you ever really myths at all? Chen paused, considering the question carefully. That's a fascinating philosophical point, Ambassador. A myth is a story that carries truth in a form people can understand. For 3,000 years, the galaxy needed to believe in the possibility of hope, even when facing impossible odds. She gestured toward the windows, where human and council ships could be seen conducting joint patrols. Perhaps we were never myths in the traditional sense, she continued. Perhaps we were always potential, the possibility that someone somewhere was preparing for the darkness. The galaxy kept our stories alive because it needed to believe that victory was possible. Thylix nodded slowly. And now that potential has become reality. Not just for humanity, Chen replied. Every species in the Council has potential we've barely begun to explore. Your people's mastery of energy manipulation, the crystalline ability to store and process information, the mantid collective decision-making. These aren't just useful skills. They're the foundation of something greater. She pointed to the holographic display still showing the galactic map. We've spent so much time focusing on our individual strengths that we never imagined what we could accomplish together. Humans survived the Devourers through stubbornness and chaos, but we could never have built something like this alliance on our own. Later that evening, Thylix stood on the observation deck watching the daily shift change among the patrol fleets. Human vessels moved with their characteristic unpredictable patterns, while council ships maintained precise formations. The two styles looked chaotic at first glance, but as he watched longer, Thylix began to see the underlying harmony. A young voice beside him said, "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" He turned to see Captain Rodriguez, still in her instructor's uniform after the day's classes. "Captain Rodriguez," he said. "I didn't hear you approach," she smiled. "Sorry, occupational hazard. We humans tend to be good at moving quietly." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the fleet movements outside. "Captain," Thylix said eventually, "do you think this alliance will last? Can species with such different approaches to problems really work together long-term?" Rodriguez considered the question while observing a human frigate that seemed to flicker in and out of visibility as it passed near a crystalline cruiser. "You know what I learned during the Devourer War?" she said finally. "The strongest structures aren't the ones made from identical parts. They're built from different materials that complement each other's weaknesses." She gestured toward the fleet. "Your energy weapons provide the precision we lack. Our chaos systems offer the unpredictability your orderly minds find difficult. Together we're not just stronger, we're something entirely new." "A new kind of civilization," Thylix mused.